The ink on the divorce papers was still wet when Elise smiled, a predator claiming her kill, unaware that the penthouse she just fought for was already underwater. She thought she was stripping her husband of his fortune, but she was only shackling herself to a sinking ship of mortgages and liabilities he was too exhausted to keep afloat. It is the perfect crime committed not with a weapon, but with a signature. If you find yourself drawn to the silence of a collapsing marriage and the Benitibon sharp edge of poetic justice, stay with me, because the real tragedy is just beginning. The notification on the iPad was mundane. It wasn't a sordid photo or a breathless text message. It was a calendar sync error. Julian Vance sat in the wingback chair of his study, the leather cold against his spine. The room was dim, lit only by the amber glow of a street lamp filtering through the rain-streaked windows of the 42nd floor. Below, Chicago was a grid of electric veins, pulsing with a life he felt increasingly detached from. He looked down at the tablet again. Mateo's birthday weekend. Aspen. Flight AA2490. It was synced to the shared family calendar, likely a mistake made by a thumb slipping on a glass screen. Elise was supposed to be at a wellness retreat in Sedona this weekend. Julian swiped the notification away, his face betraying nothing, not even to the empty room. He didn't feel the hot rush of jealousy he might have expected. Instead, he felt a strange, hollow exhaustion. The heavy oak door creaked open. The scent of tuberose and expensive Chardonnay drifted in before she did. "Jules, you're sitting in the dark," Elise said. Her voice was light, practiced. It was the voice she used for donors and board members. "Just thinking," Julian replied, not turning his chair. Elise walked into his line of sight. She was wearing the silk emerald dress he had bought her for their 10th anniversary, the fabric clinging to a body that she spent 3 hours a day perfecting at the gym. She looked magnificent. She looked expensive. "You're always thinking. It's boring," she sighed, leaning against the mahogany desk, swirling the remaining wine in her glass. "Are you coming to bed? Or are you going to stare at those spreadsheets all night?" Julian finally looked at her. He saw the way her eyes didn't quite meet his, focusing instead on the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, then the abstract painting on the wall. She loved the things around him, the atmosphere he provided. But she looked through him. "I was looking at the portfolio leverage," Julian said quietly. "The commercial loans on the penthouse and the gallery. The variable rates are adjusting next month." Elise rolled her eyes, a gesture of teenage petulance on a 40-year-old face. "God, Julian, always with the doom and gloom. We have money. Look around you." She swept her hand grandly, encompassing the panoramic view of the skyline, the custom furniture, the curated life. "Stop trying to ruin the mood." "It's not about ruining the mood, Elise. It's about sustainability. If the market dips, if, she interrupted, setting her glass down with a sharp clink on a coaster. "You handle the boring math, I handle the life. That was the deal. I'm going to bed. I have to pack for Sedona early tomorrow." She turned to leave, the silk rustling like dry leaves. "Sedona," Julian repeated, testing the weight of the word. "Yes, yoga, meditation, silence. Exactly what I need to get away from your stress." She paused at the door, her hand on the brass knob. "Don't stay up late." The door clicked shut. Julian turned back to the window. He picked up a physical file folder lying on his desk, the boring math she refused to look at. The truth was, the Vance empire was a house of cards. They were asset-rich but cash-poor, leveraged to the hilt to maintain appearances in a social circle that smelled blood in the water. The loans were cross-collateralized. The penthouse wasn't truly theirs, it belonged to the bank, held only by interest-only payments that Julian scraped together each month through high-risk maneuvering. If he stopped pedaling, the bike would fall over. He thought of Mateo. He knew the name, a 28-year-old conceptual architect who Elise had hired to redesign the gallery lobby. He was handsome, unburdened by debt, and entirely financed by clients like Elise. Julian looked at the calendar notification again. Aspen. The house there was also heavily mortgaged, a ticking time bomb set to reset its rate in 3 years. A slow, cold realization settled over Julian. For years, he had been killing himself to keep the ceiling from collapsing on Elise's head. He had been the Atlas of her world, his shoulders cracking under the weight, while she complained about his posture. If he confronted her now, she would cry. She would gaslight him. She would drag it out. But what if he didn't fight? He looked at the balance sheet. Liabilities, $14.5 million. Liquid assets, $2 million. Real estate value, market, $15 million. On paper, they were wealthy. In reality, they were breaking even. If the market turned, that $15 million in real estate would plummet, but the $14.5 million debt would remain. Julian closed the folder. He reached for his phone and opened his private banking app, staring at the only account Elise didn't have access to, the modest, unencumbered savings account. He could keep fighting to save the ship, or he could lower the lifeboat for himself and let the captain go down with the vessel she demanded to command. He stood up and walked to the window, pressing his hand against the cold glass. The reflection of his own face stared back, tired, aging, but for the first time in years, smiling. "Enjoy, Sedona," he whispered to the empty room. Elise returned on Sunday evening, bringing with her a gust of cool air that didn't belong to the humidity of a Chicago September. She dropped her Goyard travel bag in the foyer, the sound of heavy canvas hitting marble echoing through the quiet apartment. Julian was in the kitchen, carefully brewing a pour-over coffee. He didn't rush to greet her. He watched the dark liquid drip into the carafe, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3. "I'm home," she called out, her voice pitched a little too high, a little too cheerful. He walked out to meet her. She looked radiant, her cheeks flushed with what she would claim was desert heat, but which Julian recognized as windburn. She was wearing a thick cashmere sweater, an odd choice for Arizona, but perfect for the slopes of Aspen. "Welcome back," Julian said, leaning against the archway. "How were the vortexes? Did you find your center?" Elise hesitated for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of panic that vanished as quickly as it appeared. She smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Oh, it was intense. So much spiritual energy. We did a silent hike this morning before the flight. I feel cleansed." "Silent hike," Julian repeated, nodding slowly. "That sounds peaceful. No cell service, I imagine?" "None at all. It was bliss to be disconnected." He knew for a fact that the reception at the St. Regis in Aspen was excellent. He also knew, because he had checked the credit card alerts he hadn't yet disabled, that she had enjoyed a $400 lunch at the Cloud9 Alpine Bistro yesterday. "I'm glad," he said. He didn't kiss her. He didn't offer to take her bag. "I've been doing some thinking while you were gone about the stress you mentioned." Elise stiffened slightly. "Julian, please, I just walked in the door. Can we not talk about finances tonight?" "We're not talking about finances," he lied smoothly. "We're talking about lifestyle. You were right. I've been holding on too tight, trying to control everything." Her shoulders relaxed. This was a script she liked. "Finally, I've been telling you that for years." "I'm going to step back," Julian said. "Focus less on the minutiae. Let things flow a bit more." She beamed at him, misinterpreting his surrender as submission. She thought she had won the argument about spending. She didn't realize he was simply letting go of the steering wheel on a downhill curve. The next morning, Julian sat in his office downtown. The glass walls offered a view of the lake, gray and churning. On his desk sat a stack of invoices that usually demanded his immediate, frantic attention. The mortgage interest for the penthouse, $42,000. The quarterly property tax installment, $18,000. The insurance premium for the art collection, $6,500. Usually he would be on the phone right now, moving funds from the operating account to the personal account, borrowing against a line of credit to cover the cash flow gap, robbing Peter to pay Paul. It was a juggling act he had performed flawlessly for a decade. Today he picked up the invoices and placed them neatly in the bottom drawer of his desk. He opened his laptop and logged into the Cayman Holding Trust he had established years ago, a dormant entity intended for estate planning, never used. With a few keystrokes, he initiated a wire transfer. $2 million, the entirety of his liquid, unencumbered cash, moved from their joint Chase account into the trust. The screen blinked. Transfer complete. He felt a physical weight lift from his chest. The operating account was now empty. The credit lines were maxed out. When the mortgage payment auto draft attempted to clear on Friday, it would bounce. It would be the first missed payment in his life. A black mark. A warning shot. His phone buzzed. A text from Elise. Mateo needs the deposit for the marble sourcing. $15K. Can you wire it to the gallery account? XX. Julian stared at the message. Mateo, the man who had spent the weekend skiing with his wife on Julian's dime. He typed back, sure, handle it tomorrow. He wouldn't handle it. Not tomorrow, not ever again. He closed his laptop and spun his chair around to face the city. The storm clouds were gathering over the lake, heavy and dark. Most people would see bad weather coming. Julian saw cover. Let it rain, he said softly. The conference room at Sterling and Hart smelled of beeswax polish and intimidation. It was a corner office on the 55th floor, designed to make anyone sitting on the opposite side of the table feel small, underfunded, and out of options. Elise sat next to her lawyer, a man named Marcus Sterling, who wore pinstripes and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Elise was dressed in black, a somber, tasteful choice for the funeral of her marriage, though the diamond studs in her ears caught the harsh fluorescent light every time she turned her head. Julian sat opposite them, his own attorney, a tired-looking man named Frank, shuffling papers with deliberate slowness. Let's cut to the chase, Sterling began, his voice smooth as oil. My client wants a clean break. She has supported Mr. Vance's career for 10 years, managing the social portfolio that made his networking possible. She is entitled to the standard equitable distribution. Julian kept his hands folded on the table. He looked at Elise. She wouldn't meet his gaze. She was checking her phone under the table. A quick, furtive glance. Mateo, likely waiting at a bar downstairs. We are prepared to offer the liquid savings, Frank mumbled, pushing a paper forward. $2 million. Julian keeps the real estate in the business holdings. Elise laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. $2 million? Julian, don't insult me. The penthouse alone is worth $6 million. The Aspen Lodge is $4 million. The gallery space, the portfolio? The real estate is complicated, Julian said softly. The market is volatile right now, Elise. Cash is king. Take the cash. So you can keep the appreciation, Sterling interjected, tapping a gold pen on the glass table. Absolutely not. We are aware of the valuations. We want the Lakeshore Drive property. We want the Aspen Retreat. And we want the controlling interest in the Vance Art Holdings LLC. This was the moment, the pivot point. Julian felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back, despite the aggressive air conditioning. If he agreed too quickly, Sterling, who was no fool, might dig into the debt structures of those LLCs. He had to make them fight for the poison. Aspen has been in my family's plans for years, Julian said, injecting a tremor of hesitation into his voice. I built that deck with my own hands. It's my sanctuary. It's an asset, Elise snapped, her eyes finally locking onto his, cold and hard. And since you spent every holiday working while I entertained your guests there, I think I've earned it. Julian looked down, feigning defeat. He rubbed his temples as if fighting a migraine. Elise, the maintenance on that place. The upkeep. I can handle upkeep, Julian, I'm not a child. And the gallery? Julian asked. It's a passion project. It doesn't generate significant yield. It generates prestige, she countered. And Mateo, she stopped, catching herself. And it has potential that you've been stifling with your conservatism. Sterling leaned forward. Mr. Vance, if you want to avoid a forensic audit of your venture capital firm, which I imagine would be invasive and time-consuming, I suggest you give my client what she wants. The homes, the gallery. You keep your firm and the cash. Julian looked at Frank, who gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The trap was set. Julian sighed, a long, weary exhalation that sounded like a man losing everything. In reality, it was the sound of a man setting down a 100-pound pack he had carried for a decade. Fine, Julian whispered. Take the penthouse, take Aspen, take the Gallery LLC. Elise's face lit up. It was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. She looked at Sterling with a mixture of awe and arousal. They had crushed him. They had stripped him bare. But, Julian added, his voice hardening slightly, I want a full indemnity clause. Once you sign for those LLCs, you own them. The assets, the liabilities, the future. I walk away with the prestige and my personal freedom. No spousal support. Done, Elise said instantly, before Sterling could even consult his notes. I don't need your monthly allowance, Julian. I have my own empire now. The papers were slid across the polished table. Julian picked up a pen. He didn't hesitate. He signed his name next to the X on 3 separate deeds. Vance Residential Holdings, LLC, Vance Art and Design, LLC, Aspen Summit Properties, LLC. With each signature, he transferred ownership of $14 million in debt to his wife. Elise signed with a flourish, the scratch of her pen loud in the silent room. She believed she had just secured a $10 million portfolio. She didn't know she had just signed a death warrant for her financial future. It's done, Sterling announced, closing his binder. Elise stood up, smoothing her skirt. She looked at Julian one last time, pity in her eyes. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Julian. Honestly. I think I just did, Julian replied, capping his pen. He watched her walk out of the room, her heels clicking a rhythm of victory. He waited until the door fully closed before he allowed himself to exhale. The air in the room suddenly felt breathable. The silence in the penthouse was different now. It was no longer the oppressive quiet of a museum after hours. It was the hollow, echoing silence of an evacuated building. Julian stood in the center of the foyer. At his feet sat a single suitcase, a matte black Toomey carry-on. It contained 2 suits, 5 shirts, his laptop, and his passport. Everything else, the custom Italian sofas, the grand piano nobody played, the collection of avant-garde sculptures Elise insisted were vital, remained. They were part of the inventory. They were her assets. They were her problem. He checked his watch. 7:15 p.m. Elise had texted him an hour ago. The celebratory dinner ends at 8. We'll be stopping by with a few friends for drinks. Please be gay. We. The word hung in the air. He knew who we included. He walked over to the marble console table near the door. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the heavy brass keyring, the fob for the building entrance, the laser-cut key for the private elevator, the master key for the penthouse. He placed them on the cool stone. Clink. The sound was final, like the closing of a book. For a moment, Julian felt a phantom limb sensation, a twinge of loss for the decade he had spent building this life. He remembered carrying Elise over this threshold. He remembered the Christmas parties, the late nights working in the study while she slept, the belief that he was building a legacy, but a legacy built on debt and deceit wasn't a fortress. It was a prison, and he had just been paroled. The private elevator chime dinged softly. Julian stiffened. They were early. The doors slid open, but it wasn't Elise. It was Henry, the building's concierge, looking flustered. Mr. Vance, Henry said, stepping out. I'm sorry to intrude. Mrs. Vance, she called ahead. She wanted me to ensure the champagne was chilled. She's in the lobby now. Julian picked up the handle of his suitcase. It's fine, Henry. I'm just leaving. Henry looked at the single bag, then at the keys on the table. He had worked in this building for 20 years. He knew the smell of a divorce, but he had never seen an exit this quiet. Is there anything you need help with, sir? The rest of your luggage? This is it, Henry, Julian said, offering a small, tight smile. I'm traveling light. The elevator doors began to close, but Henry held them open. You've always been good to us, Mr. Vance. Good luck. Goodbye, Henry. Julian stepped into the elevator. As the doors sealed, he saw the foyer one last time. The perfect lighting, the expensive art, the keys waiting like a trap on the table. The descent was smooth, rapid. When the doors opened in the lobby, he saw them. Elise was walking through the revolving doors, laughing, her arm looped through Mateo's. Mateo looked every inch the conqueror, slim suit, no socks, a scarf loosely draped around his neck. Behind them were 2 other couples, the hangers-on of their social circle, people who drank Julian's wine and forgot his name. Julian veered left toward the service exit. He didn't want the confrontation. He didn't want the scene. But Elise saw him. "Julian," she called out, her voice cutting through the ambient lobby music. It wasn't angry, it was patronizing. "Leaving so soon? You didn't want to toast to my new chapter?" He stopped. He turned slowly. Mateo smirked, looking Julian up and down, his eyes lingering on the small suitcase. "Business trip, old man? Or just moving on?" "Something like that," Julian said calmly. His pulse was steady, surprisingly so. "Well," Elise said, stepping closer, smelling of expensive gin and Triumph, "don't worry about the plants. Mateo is going to redesign the terrace anyway. We're going for something more organic." "Organic sounds expensive," Julian said. "Make sure you check the irrigation system. It's tricky." "I'll figure it out," Mateo scoffed. "It's just plumbing." "Right," Julian said, "just plumbing." He looked at Elise, really looked at her. He saw the excitement in her eyes, the adrenaline of her win. He almost pitied her. Almost. "The keys are on the console," Julian said. "Enjoy the view, Elise." "I intend to," she replied, turning back to her friends, dismissing him as if he were the help. Julian pushed through the heavy glass side door and stepped out onto the street. The Chicago wind hit him, sharp and cold, carrying the scent of impending rain. It was the freshest air he had breathed in years. He raised a hand. A yellow cab pulled over instantly. The driver, a man with a thick beard and tired eyes, looked in the rearview mirror as Julian tossed his bag onto the seat. "Where to, boss?" Julian looked back at the building. He could see the lights of the penthouse flickering on. 42 stories up. The party was starting. The meter was running. "O'Hare," Julian said, settling back into the worn vinyl seat. "International Terminal. One way." 1 year later, the air in the Olympic Peninsula was different from Chicago. It was wetter, heavier, smelling of cedar bark, wet soil, and salt. It didn't smell like money. It smelled like life. Julian Vance stood on the porch of a small A-frame cabin, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand. He was wearing flannel and denim, boots caked with the morning's mud. He hadn't worn a tie in 12 months. His hair was longer, salted with more gray, but the dark circles under his eyes, the permanent bruises of insomnia, were gone. He took a sip of the coffee. It was cheap, store-brand roast, and it tasted better than anything he had ever drunk in a high-rise boardroom. Inside the cabin, a laptop sat open on a rough-hewn table. It was his only tether to the old world. He still traded, but quietly, small, conservative positions using his own capital. No leverage, no debt. If he lost today, he still ate tomorrow. He checked the news feed. The market was bullish, inflated by the same cheap credit that had built his previous life. He scrolled past the headlines until a small item in the Chicago Business Cranes caught his eye. Vance Gallery announces Neo Void exhibition, a bold new direction under the creative leadership of Matteo Rossi. Julian clicked the link. The photo showed Elise and Matteo at a launch party. Elise was wearing a dress that likely cost more than Julian's current vehicle. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a glass of champagne in hand. Matteo was brooding artistically next to her, looking bored. Julian zoomed in. He saw what the camera didn't mean to capture. The tightness around Elise's eyes. The way her hand gripped the stem of the glass a little too hard. He closed the tab. He didn't feel vindictive. He felt a quiet, somber certainty. The clock was ticking. In Chicago, the Neo Void party was in full swing, and Elise was drowning in noise. The gallery looked spectacular. Matteo had stripped the walls down to raw brick, a renovation that had cost $300,000, and installed lighting that mimicked the harsh glare of a police interrogation room. The critics called it unflinching. Elise called it expensive. "Darling, relax," Matteo whispered in her ear, his breath smelling of vodka. "You look tense. It's ruining the vibe." "I'm not tense," Elise hissed, forcing a smile at a passing socialite. "I'm concerned. The caterer wanted cash up front, Matteo. Cash. Do you know how embarrassing that is?" "Peasants," Matteo scoffed, waving a hand. "They don't understand cash flow. Just put it on the platinum card." "The platinum card is near the limit," Elise said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And the property tax bill for the penthouse came yesterday. It's $60,000, Mateo. Where is that coming from? Mateo rolled his eyes. You sound just like him, always obsessed with the numbers. Look around you, Elise. These people adore us. One sale tonight covers all of that. He drifted away, drawn to a reporter from Vogue, leaving Elise standing alone next to a sculpture that looked like a pile of twisted rebar. She felt a vibration in her clutch. She pulled out her phone, an email notification from the bank. Subject, notice of delinquency. Commercial loan number 8839. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was the gallery's mortgage. She had missed the payment date by 3 days, just 3 days. Surely they wouldn't notice. Surely they knew who she was. She looked across the room. She saw her reflection in the darkened window. She looked glamorous. She looked powerful. She was Elise Vance, the queen of the Chicago art scene. She hit delete on the email. It was just a computer error, a glitch. She would call the private banker on Monday and charm him. It had always worked before. Champagne, a waiter offered Baum, holding out a tray. Elise took a glass. She downed it in one swallow, the bubbles burning her throat. Another, she ordered. She turned back to the party, the music thumping in her chest like a second, panicked heartbeat. She was dancing on the edge of a cliff, and the only way to keep from falling was to spin faster. 2,000 miles away, Julian rinsed his mug in the sink, watching the soapy water spiral down the drain. He dried his hands, put on his jacket, and walked out into the rain. The silence of the forest swallowed him whole, comforting and absolute. Year 3 arrived, not with a bang, but with a registered letter. It sat on the marble kitchen island of the penthouse like a tombstone. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and bore the embossed logo of First National Commercial Bank. Elise stared at it. The kitchen was quiet. Mateo was still asleep or pretending to be, shielding himself from the morning light and the mounting tension in the apartment. The Neo Void exhibition had been a critical success but a financial disaster. The avant-garde sculptures had garnered likes on Instagram, but no buyers. Elise picked up the letter opener, a silver dagger that felt increasingly appropriate, and slit the envelope. She pulled out the document. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, skipping over the clauses until they hit the number at the bottom of the page. Principal balance due, $4,250,000. Due date, October 15th. The balloon payment. For 3 years, she had been paying interest only, a manageable $20,000 a month that she had scraped together by maxing out credit cards and quietly selling off a few of Julian's lesser-known watches. But the term was up. The principal was due. $4 million, she whispered, the number feeling alien in her mouth. She wasn't worried, not really. This was how real estate worked. You didn't pay it off, you refinanced. You rolled the debt into a new loan, maybe pulled out a little equity for a vacation, and kept the carousel spinning. She dressed quickly, choosing a power suit, Yves Saint Laurent vintage. She needed to look like a woman who didn't need the money, just the convenience. The meeting was at the bank's headquarters, but not in the plush private wealth lounge she was used to. She was guided to a small, glass-walled office on the second floor. The man sitting behind the desk was not her usual banker, the silver-haired Mr. Henderson who always asked about her galas. This was a younger man, Mr. Liu. He had no photos on his desk, only a calculator in a dual-monitor setup. "Mrs. Vance," he said, not standing up, "please sit. I'm here about the refinancing on the Lakeshore property in the Aspen Holdings," Elise said, flashing her most dazzling smile. "Mr. Henderson usually handles this, but I assume he briefed you. We just want to roll the principal over. Maybe extend the term another 5 years." Mr. Liu didn't smile back. He typed something into his keyboard. "Mr. Henderson retired last year. I'm managing the portfolio now, and unfortunately, a rollover isn't possible." Elise laughed, a brittle sound. "Don't be silly. The property value has skyrocketed. Just look at the comps." "I have looked at the comps, Mrs. Vance," Liu said, turning the screen toward her. "The luxury condo market in Chicago has cooled significantly in the last 24 months. Inventory is up 40%. Your unit, it was appraised last week at $3.8 million. Elise stared at the screen. "That's impossible. We bought it for $5. "You bought it at the peak," Liu corrected. "And You borrowed 4.2 against it, plus the second lien for the gallery renovation. Mrs. Vance, you are underwater by nearly $1 million. The room seemed to tilt. Underwater? To refinance, you would need to bring cash to the table to cover the difference, approximately $800,000. Do you have that liquidity? Elise's mouth went dry. Liquidity? She didn't even have enough for next month's HOA fees. What about Aspen? She asked, her voice trembling. We can sell Aspen. It's a seller's market there. The Aspen property is cross-collateralized with the Vance Art Holdings LLC loan, Lou explained, his voice devoid of sympathy. If you sell Aspen, the proceeds go directly to pay down the business debt, which is also in default. You wouldn't see a penny from the sale. Elise gripped the arms of the chair. The walls of the glass office felt like they were closing in. So, she whispered, what are my options? You pay the $4 million by October 15th, Lou said simply, or we initiate foreclosure proceedings on all secured assets. He handed her a card. Have a nice day, Mrs. Vance. Elise walked out of the bank and into the blinding afternoon sun. She felt dizzy. People rushed past her, busy, purposeful, solvent. She felt like a ghost haunting her own life. She hailed a cab, giving the address of the gallery. She needed to talk to Matteo. They needed a plan. Maybe he could ask his family. Maybe they could sell the art at a discount. When she arrived at the gallery, the door was locked. It was 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. She unlocked it and stepped inside. The space was dark, the aggressive lighting turned off. Matteo, she called out. Silence. She walked to the back office. It was empty. The vintage Eames chair behind the desk was gone. The iMac was gone. On the desk sat a single piece of paper, an invoice from the contractor who had done the renovation. Overdue, final notice. And next to it, a sticky note in Matteo's sprawling handwriting. Elise, going to Art Basel in Miami with the client from the launch. Don't wait up. The vibe here is too heavy lately. We need space. Elise stared at the note. He hadn't just left. He had fled. He had sensed the collapse before she did, sniffing the lack of money like an animal sensing a predator. She sank onto the floor, the cold concrete seeping through her designer skirt. The gallery was silent, save for the hum of the HVAC system she couldn't afford to run. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't think about what she wanted. She thought about Julian. She thought about the way he used to sit in his study, staring at spreadsheets, trying to solve the puzzle she had created. She realized now with a sickening jolt that he hadn't been boring. He had been holding up the scout, and now that he was gone, the sky was falling. The sound of duct tape tearing was louder than a gunshot in the hushed corridor. Elise stood in the hallway wearing yesterday's clothes, her hair pulled back in a severe, messy bun. 2 men in beige uniforms were working efficiently on her front door. One was applying a large orange sticker. The other was changing the lock. Excuse me, Elise said, her voice trembling with indignation she no longer felt. I live here. My things are inside. The deputy didn't look up. This property is now in the possession of First National Commercial Bank. You had 30 days to vacate, ma'am. The notice was served. I didn't see a notice, Elise lied. She had seen them all. The stack of unopened mail on the console table was a monument to her denial. You have 20 minutes to collect personal essentials, the deputy said, finally turning to face her. Medicines, documents, a change of clothes, everything else, furniture, art, electronics, is part of the lien seizure. He unlocked the door he had just secured and held it open. It was an invitation to her own funeral. Elise walked into the penthouse. It smelled stale. The cleaning service had quit 2 weeks ago when the check bounced. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light that streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the view she had paid everything for. She walked to the bedroom. She pulled out a suitcase, not the Goyard, which she had sold last week to pay the electric bill, but an old gym bag. She opened her jewelry box. Empty. She had pawned the last of the diamonds to fund the rebranding of the gallery that never happened. All that remained were costume pieces and a simple silver band Julian had given her when they were first dating. She stared at it for a moment, then dropped it into the bag. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting another creditor. Instead, it was an Instagram notification. Matteo Rossi just posted a photo. Her thumb hovered, then tapped. The photo was blindingly bright. Miami. A yacht. Matteo was shirtless, holding a glass of rosé, laughing. Next to him, leaning intimately against his shoulder, was the 22-year-old daughter of a tech billionaire Elise had once tried to woo as a donor. The caption read, "New Horizons, Living My Truth, #blessed, #Art Basel, #next chapter." Elise felt a laugh bubble up in her throat, bitter and jagged. Living his truth. His truth was a parasite finding a new host. She shoved the phone back into her pocket. She didn't have time to cry over Matteo. She had 10 minutes left. She walked into the living room. The neo-void sculptures she had brought home from the failed gallery exhibition were still there, twisted metal monstrosities that now looked like wreckage. She saw the grand piano. She ran a hand over the glossy black finish. She had fought Julian tooth and nail for this piano during the settlement, screaming that it was vital for her creative soul. She hadn't played it once in 3 years. "Ma'am, time's up," the deputy called from the foyer. Elise zipped the gym bag. She took one last look around. The apartment was exactly as she had demanded it, full of expensive things, devoid of warmth. It wasn't a home. It was a showroom for a life she couldn't afford. She walked to the door. Henry, the concierge, was standing in the hallway with the deputies, holding a clipboard. He looked older, more tired. He looked at her gym bag, then at her face. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance," Henry said softly. "I tried to call up when they arrived, but your line has been disconnected." "It's fine, Henry," Elise said, her chin held high, though her eyes were burning. "I was leaving anyway. The energy in this place, it's stagnant." Henry didn't nod. He didn't offer to carry her bag. He just pressed the button for the elevator. The ride down was silent. When the doors opened to the lobby, Elise didn't head for the main revolving doors. She couldn't face the doorman. She couldn't face the street where her neighbors might be walking their poodles. She turned toward the service exit. "Mrs. Vance?" Henry called out. She paused, her hand on the heavy metal bar of the door. "Mr. Vance left a forwarding number," Henry said, his voice echoing in the marble lobby. 3 years ago, he told me to give it to you if you ever looked like you needed it." Elise turned slowly. Henry was holding out a small slip of paper. "I don't need his help," Elise snapped. "It's not for help, ma'am," Henry said, placing the paper on the concierge desk. "It's just a number." Elise stared at the paper. It was white, crisp, stark against the dark wood. She walked over and snatched it up, shoving it into her pocket without looking at it. "Goodbye, Henry." She pushed through the service doors and stepped out into the alley. It was raining, a cold, miserable Chicago drizzle. She had no umbrella. She had no cab fare. She had no penthouse. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and began to walk. She didn't know where she was going. For the first time in her life, she had no destination, no plan, and no one to blame but the woman reflected in the puddles beneath her feet. The diner smelled of frying bacon and damp wool. Outside, the Washington rain was a relentless gray curtain that blurred the pines into dark, smudges against the horizon. Elise sat in a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug of black coffee. She looked out of place. Her trench coat, though 3 seasons old, was still too structured, too sharp for the worn vinyl seats. Her hair was pulled back, but strands escaped, frizzing in the humidity. She checked her phone. No signal. The bell above the door jingled. Julian walked in. He didn't look like the man she had divorced. The stoop in his shoulders was gone. His skin, once pallid from office fluorescence, was weathered and tanned. He wore a heavy canvas jacket and boots that had seen the actual mud, not just city puddles. He saw her immediately. He didn't smile, but he didn't flinch either. He walked over and slid into the booth opposite on her. "Elise," he said. His voice was deeper, rougher. "Julian," she replied, trying to summon the old power in her voice, but it cracked. "You look different, rustic." "I am different," he said. "How did you find me?" "Henry," she admitted, looking down at her coffee. "He gave me the number. I called. You answered." "I did." A waitress approached with a pot of coffee. Julian turned over his mug. "Black, please, Marge." "You got it, hun." The domesticity of it. Him knowing the waitress, the ease of his existence here, stung Elise more than the foreclosure. He had built a life, a real one. I lost the penthouse, she said abruptly. She couldn't do small talk. She didn't have the energy. I know, Julian said. I saw the filing online. And the gallery, she added, her voice rising slightly. Mateo? He ruined it. He spent money we didn't have. He left me, Julian. He left me with nothing. Julian took a sip of his coffee. He set the mug down carefully. He didn't leave you with nothing, though, Elise. He left you with the consequences. I need help, she whispered. The words tasted like ash. I have debts, Julian. Tax liens. The bank is threatening to sue for the deficiency judgment. I need a loan just to get back on my feet. I know you have money hidden away. You always did. Julian looked at her, and for the first time, Elise saw pity in his eyes. It was worse than anger. I don't have millions, Elise, he said softly. I have enough to keep the roof patched and the wood stove fed. I live simply now. The trust I move the money into, it's an annuity. It pays me a living wage, nothing more. I can't bail you out. But you let me take those companies, she hissed, leaning across the table. You let me sign those papers. You knew they were debt traps. I let you take what you demanded, Julian corrected her, his voice calm but firm. You wanted the prestige. You wanted the address. You wanted the empire. You screamed at me for years that I was holding you back, that I was too conservative, too boring. So I gave you the wheel, Elise. I gave you exactly what you asked for. You set me up to fail. No, Julian said. I set you up to choose. You could have sold the penthouse the day after the divorce. You could have liquidated the gallery. You could have paid off the debts and walked away with a clean slate and a few million in the bank. But you didn't. You kept spending. You kept pretending. He leaned back. You didn't want the money, Elise. You wanted the audience. Elise stared at him. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and angry. So that's it? You're just going to watch me drown? You're not drowning, Julian said, standing up. He pulled a $5 bill from his pocket, crumpled real currency, and placed it on the table. You're just finally touching the bottom. It's a solid place to start building from. Where are you going? She asked, panic rising in her chest. Home, he said. I have wood to chop before the storm hits tonight. Julian, please. He stopped. He looked at her one last time. There was no love left, but the hate was gone too. There was only the indifference of a stranger passing on a street. Goodbye, Elise. He turned and walked out the door. The bell jingled. A gust of cold, wet wind blew in, swirling the napkins on the table. Elise watched through the window as he climbed into an old Ford truck. The engine roared to life, a rough, reliable sound. He pulled out onto the wet asphalt and drove away, disappearing into the mist of the pines. She sat alone in the booth. The waitress came back with the check pad. Can I get you anything else, hun? Elise looked at the $5 bill Julian had left. It was enough for the coffee. It was enough for the tip. It was exactly enough, and not a penny more. No, Elise whispered, picking up the bill. I think I've had enough. She looked out at the rain, realizing for the first time that the storm wasn't something to be managed or leveraged or hidden from. It was just rain, and she was going to have to walk through it.